Life on life's terms is often uncomfortable. We all know that. But today we remain comfortable at great peril. As Brent Hamachek of Human Events warned us last summer, it will take a willingness to walk barefoot on sharp rocks to preserve liberty, and tonight's speaker is doing just that. It's been said in some fashion or another, purportedly by Gandhi and by Hubert Humphrey, that a society can be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable. The treatment of our elderly in the pandemic response, those most vulnerable to the virus, and the treatment of the children, the least susceptible to the virus, but the most vulnerable to our control, has caused enormous suffering. While many physicians have chosen another option, Dr. Mark McDonald, his commitment to both his patients and reality meant he cannot play along as he witnessed the profound damage from the response to the virus. He has put his career on the line in service of protecting his patients and keeping his oath. Just today, Dr. McDonald penned a letter boldly standing up to the abuse of children which mask mandates create. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Mark McDonald graduated from UC Berkeley and attended medical school at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Trained in both adult and child and adolescent psychiatry, he now works primarily with children in private practice in Southern California. He has lived in and worked in Asia, Europe, and Central America, and his opinions on topics such as the need to reopen America's schools and the pandemic of fear in the United States today have been widely published in the local and national news, including the Wall Street Journal and the Federalist. His analysis of what is driving significant mental health effects has landed him on Tucker, as well as with Dennis Prager, and many other prominent venues interested in diversity of thought. Dr. McDonald is the author of the United States of Fear, which will be available for sale tonight after the program. Highly recommend this. And he also has a powerfully named website that you'll want to check out. It's dissonantmd.com, and also has a podcast, which I hope he will share with us. So history shows us that willingness to speak up, to say what is true, though maybe unpopular, and challenge the narrative is paramount to the defeat of tyranny. And fortune does, in fact, favor the brave. So tonight, as is forum tradition, we welcome another courageous patriot, Dr. Mark McDonald.
Welcome to the Dissident Cafe. That is my website, Dissident MD, which I coined about maybe a month and a half ago, right after I published my book in November, because I believe that essentially anyone now that expresses a contrary opinion to what you hear in the news or what is commonly regarded as the correct way to think is in fact putting himself in the position of a dissident. And anyone who listens to him or repeats his opinions is considered a dissident as well. I flew in from Los Angeles today and I almost didn't make it. My boarding pass bounced at the little scanner where it gives you the green light or the red light. I got the red light. And I was concerned that perhaps I'd have to drive, because when I dropped off my bag, I checked one bag. I was at the little kiosk that's, probably the distance between here and the door, nobody around me. And I never wear a mask at the airport. I'm the only one that doesn't. If I run into Dennis Prager, it'll be 2, because he doesn't either. I'm always hoping someone will walk by and give me the thumbs up without the mask. Hasn't happened yet. Although I was accosted by an American Airlines stewardess on my last trip coming back from Dallas in the LA airport. When she passed me by, she said, "You really should be wearing a mask." And I said, "No, I shouldn't." She said, "Yes, you should." I said, "No, I'm fine, thank you." And I just kept walking. 3 people actually came and mobbed me as I was checking in my bag at LA to remind me that I needed to wear a mask inside the federal boundary of the airport, meaning when you walk in that door from the curb, you're in federal territory. And I said, "Well, Gavin Newsom actually got rid of this whole thing last week." And she said, "No, he didn't. This is federal property, sir." So I ignored her. She gave me a mask and I put it in my pocket and then I threw it in the trash. I approached the counter and the woman at the counter said, "You need to wear your mask, sir, and over your nose." And I said, "You're very strict here, aren't you?" And she said, "We all have to follow the rules." And I said, "Well, that's very important. Rule following is our primary priority as citizens, isn't it?" She kind of scowled at me. And then when I left the counter, I put the thing back in my pocket and walked, and they all started yelling at me from behind. "You need to wear your mask." And I just waved and said, "Have a good day," and kept going. And that's why when I got up to the boarding gate and it went beep, burp, "Sir, you need to go to customer service." I went, "Oh God, do I have time to drive all the way from LA?" But it was just a technical issue and I was able to get on the plane. So I was able to get here on time and relax and actually have some coffee and prepare for this. The reason why I bring this up is that those, interesting, they were all women, by the way. I just noticed that. The stewardess that corrected my lack of mask wearing at the airport when I came back from Dallas, and then the three that approached me at LA as I was leaving today, all women. And then the men that were walking around, also Southwest agents and affiliated staff, they all were chin strapping it. And they didn't care. TSA, they didn't care either. They were very nice, very friendly, but they were all men. I'll get into that later. Interesting. So the reason why I bring this up is that that group of people, and this is true for men as well, it's not just women, it just happened to be today. They're not scared. They are petty tyrants. They are emboldened by being given really minor but very harassing powers, which they never had before, and they don't want to give them up. They are not the people that I'm speaking to and writing to in my book, United States of Fear. Those people don't need to be educated. They just need to be cut off from their power trip. And the only way to do that is through removing mandates and laws and guidance and all of that. That's a political issue. The people that I write to and the people that I write about are people who are actually fearful. When I landed in San Jose, I went to pick up my bag, and apparently they're very efficient up here in San Jose in getting your bag on the conveyor. By the time I got to the conveyor, my bag was gone. It said first bag, last bag, meaning it's bracketed. All the bags have been arrived and they've gone around. And if they haven't been picked up, they've been taken off the carousel and put into the Southwest baggage claim area for lost bags or bags that have been abandoned, the orphaned bag room. And that's where my bag was, but I didn't know that. So I waited 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and I looked at the sign and it said first bag out, last bag out. And I thought, that's strange, my bag isn't here. There's nothing in it. It's an empty bag with some junk. So I didn't think that it's going to be stolen. So I approached the woman who was standing, again, the distance between here and that door, and said, "Excuse me, do you work for South?" Before I could get the last syllable out, she said, "Sir, put on your mask. Put it on properly, above your nose." And I said, I just need some help with my luggage. My bag doesn't seem to be here. And I pulled out my sticker attached to my boarding pass so that she could see that I actually had a real bag and I wasn't there to steal someone's. And as I reached my hand out, she stepped away, and then she kind of pendulated over to grab it like this. Because it was too dangerous to bridge that gap of air. I'm surprised she didn't hold her breath like Eric Garcetti. I didn't exhale, is what he said last week in his press conference after snapping his selfie, maskless with Magic Johnson, standing beside Gavin Newsom and the Bay Area's very own Mayor London Breed, who was just feeling the vibe with Tony at the Black Cat Lounge last year. That's why she was maskless. So this woman steps away. She's freaked out. But I'm not sure if she was actually scared or whether it was just a way to show me that I was inflicting something on her and activating her self-righteous fear. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that she wasn't trying to control me. She was just literally afraid. Those are the people that I actually am trying to write about and write for and encourage others to speak to. Those who are fearful, not the petty tyrants, and certainly not the people that are actually in charge of this Gestapo-like tactic of taking away our liberties and freedoms. The people who know that what they're doing is wrong, the people who know that they're lying. They're not just hypocrites. Gavin Newsom isn't a hypocrite. He knows that everything he's doing is nonsense. Otherwise, he wouldn't be taking his wife to the French Laundry. Presumably, he loves his wife. Maybe that's a stretch. But he wouldn't be taking her there if he actually thought that going maskless at the French Laundry was putting her at risk. He also wouldn't be sending his children, which I also assume he loves, perhaps that's giving him too much credit as well, to a private school where they don't wear masks, but every other school in California does because he's ordered them to. So when you don't follow that practice of what you order other people to do, presumably for safety, with the people that you presumably care about, you're not a hypocrite, you're just a liar. And he's a liar. And there's no reason to try to educate him or convince him otherwise because he's a bad person. Anthony Fauci is a bad person. Eric Garcetti is a bad person. And I say that not because I'm judging their internal mindset, I'm just looking at their behavior and what they say, and I'm objectively saying that what they're doing is bad. Their actions are bad. They're not misinformed. They're not emotional. They're just bad. But there's another group of people, the people who are fearful, that I think we can save. Those are the people that we can reach out to. And I'm going to mention and describe how I think we can do that at the end. But before I speak about that, I want to step backwards a little bit in time and also in terms of theory, because I believe it's very, very important, just as it is in medicine. When you're in society, before you start to solve a problem, you have to understand how the problem happened. When you want to treat a patient, you first have to diagnose the patient properly. You have to understand the etiology. How did that person become diabetic? Well, obesity, lack of control of blood sugar, poor exercise. If you don't address those problems, certainly if you don't define them and announce them and make the patient acknowledge them, just throwing drugs and insulin at the patient isn't going to solve the problem. So I think it's really important for us to step back and ask ourselves, how did we get to this? Did somehow in March of 2020, this Chinese virus just sort of showed up and everybody went crazy? They all became fearful? I don't think so. I think Americans have been primed to be fearful for a very long time. I think they have been groomed to be fearful. I think that they have been normed to be fearful. In the same way that sexual predators normalize sexual abuse. They don't just jump out and start raping children, for the most part. They normalize it. They offer incentives. They offer candy. They make things feel good and pleasurable before they start to go down that dark path. That's what our government, that's what our media, and that's what our corporations have been doing for decades. Some examples. The world is going to end. Our ecology is going to be completely destroyed and disrupted in 12 years. How many times have we heard that? It started with Al Gore, who's now jet-setting around the world in his private plane. That was 25, 35 years ago that we first heard that. I mean, Sandy Cortez, otherwise known as AOC, she has taken up that mantle. The 12 years isn't up yet. I mean, she's only, 14, so we need a little bit more time. But people get scared when they hear these things. They hear these pronouncements that the world is going to end if you don't recycle, if you don't drive an electric car, if you don't put solar panels on your roof, if you don't eliminate light bulbs and plastic bags, everything's going to end. People behave through fear. Another example would be systemic racism. There's a racist under every rock. Really? I've never met a white supremacist. I get around quite a bit. Never met one. I'm sure there's a few somewhere, but this country is not systemically racist. But we're told to be afraid of racism, as if that's our primary issue that we have to deal with today. What about rape culture? 1/3 of all women will be raped before they graduate from college. That's what we're told. It's not true. If it were true, why would the liberal men and women who talk about this send their daughters to college? Would you send your daughter to college if she had a 30% chance of being raped? Of course not. But they do, they send them all to college because they know that it's not true. They do it to scare us. They do it to instill fear of men in women. I mean, why do we have toxic masculinity? Masculinity itself is now toxic. It's not bad things that men do that are toxic. Men are toxic. Being a man is toxic. That's what we're told. Be afraid of men. Women should be afraid of men. It didn't start in March of this year. It didn't start 2 years ago. I mean, Gloria Steinem, she propagated and propelled that ridiculous phrase in the 70s to national attention by arguing that women need a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Really? Women don't need men? It's news to me. Men need women just as much as women need men. We need each other. And if you don't believe that, and if you live as if that isn't true, you're going to be very, very scared. You're going to be very alone. You're going to be very sad. You're going to be very unproductive and unfulfilled. I have women like that in my practice who bought that lie, and they're now middle-aged and they're alone. And they regret profoundly that they bought into the career is everything myth. They got their career, they got wealthy, but they have no love in their life and they have no family and they have no children. It's very, very sad. They were lied to, they were scared into it. So I think our culture has been primed to be afraid. We've primed to be disconnected. We've been primed to be anxious, to be worried, to not be joyful, to not be creative, to not take risks. I mean, America's founded on risk-taking. We crossed from east to west. 20-30% of the people who crossed through the country died, even small children. Exposure, disease, attacks, violence. They did it anyway because they knew the risk was worth taking. They didn't want to stay where they were. We won't do that anymore. We don't even want to take the risk of driving to pick up our coffee now. We get it delivered by Uber Eats for an extra $4.95. And then we allow that coffee to be left on our doorstep because we're afraid that if we actually greet the human being that delivered it, we're going to catch a disease and we're going to die. And then maybe we microwave it, not to reheat it, but to kill any contaminants that are left behind as we strip our clothes off and throw them in the dryer. Now, we don't do that in this room. No, of course not. We're better than that. But a lot of Americans are. I have patients who did that. Patients in my practice right now that have been doing that for over a year. So this fear and fear-mongering, I believe, created this vibrational level of anxiety and concern and acceptability of being scared. So that when the viral threat showed up, when the Chinese virus made its way to our shores, the government, the corporations, and the media all saw an opportunity. They said, this is great. It's not a conspiracy, it was an opportunity. They said, this is great. What a great opportunity for us to then ratchet down that fear. We can declare an emergency. We can remove all the liberties, temporarily, of course. And then we can order people to behave in the way we want them to. And in the meantime, we can kill off all of the independent businesses. We can kill off all of the churches. We can eliminate any form of speech which is contrary to our opinions. We can censor and cancel because it's all misinformation. It's putting the community at risk. That's what we've been hearing for the last 2 years. And nobody can do anything about it. Because if you do, it's like not voting for a bill that's for the children. You're against the children? No, of course not. Then vote for it. So when those three powers came together and they found the opportunity to embolden and empower themselves at our expense they took advantage of it. And because Americans had been living in a state of affluence, and I would even say decadence for quite some time, meaning that all of their needs had been easily and quickly met, there was nothing that people wanted that they couldn't get. And they became lazy. They started to feel easily taken care of. They stopped craving freedom because they were so comfortable. They didn't want to resist. They didn't want to give up what they had already accumulated. And so they went along with it. And then slowly but surely, that behavior, that life without freedom, where you were being taken care of, became normative. And once people became normed into it, they didn't want to give it up. And there was a constant influx, sort of like gasoline fueling a car, of fear to help keep the vehicle going. Every morning for over a year, we would wake up and we would see in the paper or on our phone or in the news, what? What was the headline every day? It was the ticker, right? The deaths today, the cumulative death count, right? That's what we saw every day. And then of course, eventually it became hospitalizations and then ultimately became cases as the deaths and the hospitalizations and the cases became meaningless and their value and their shock influence started to subside. Can you imagine if every day for a year and a half, the first thing that we saw in the morning was 27 more car deaths yesterday, total 56,000 for the year. Oh my God, we better stop driving. Eventually you would stop driving because it would be too dangerous to drive. Out of an abundance of caution, we're going to start walking. That's exactly what would happen. This was all coordinated. It was all intentional. Keep people scared. Because when people are afraid, they stop thinking rationally. They stop thinking for themselves. And they start to allow other people to think for them. And as Thoreau said, when other people think for you, they don't think of you. That's how people became controlled in this country. I have been asked the question often, why do people put up with it? Why do they allow this to happen? What's wrong with them? How do they become brainwashed? It's a very difficult question to answer. I believe that a lot of people now are still brainwashed. They're still praying at the altar of safety. They're still worshiping the guru of safety, not realizing that the guru is really there just to collect women and money before he bolts for Hawaii on his private jet. But they don't want to leave because they've already disconnected themselves from their family. They've already isolated themselves behind the walls of the encampment, of the ashram. They've shaved their heads, they put the robes on, and they don't want to go back to their old life because they either are afraid of what that might lead to, or they're ashamed to have to admit that they were wrong. And so they hold tight, they double down. Most people are not willing to admit when they're wrong. They're certainly not willing to admit that they've harmed themselves, that they've harmed people that they love because they were conned, or because their fear just overtook them and they didn't know what else to do. It takes a very brave person to say, I was fooled, I was scared, I made a mistake, and I want to correct it. I think that there are probably three major groups of people in the country. And I really don't consider the third group at all because there's no point in even addressing them. And those are the people that are corrupt, the sociopaths, the people that are leading us down this mess. But the two other groups, the ones that are asleep and then the ones that are awake, I think are very important. And we had far more asleep people up until recently than we had awake people. I think the tide is starting to change a little bit, but for a very long time, the people were primarily asleep. They were not awake. And I endeavored day after day with my patients to try to wake them up and to try to encourage others to wake up and to wake other people up. But I was very rarely successful. Looking back on it, I believe now that the people who were asleep and the people who are still asleep, meaning the people that are essentially brainwashed, I don't think that there's really any point in trying to argue or convince or persuade those people to change right now, where they are. It's like trying to convince an alcoholic that he needs to stop drinking when he tells you, the alcohol hasn't harmed me at all and I can stop whenever I want. It's like that meme of the man that came out a few weeks ago who's sitting at his table and he's got 16 swabs stuck up each nostril. And he says, I'm on my 18th test today, but I can stop anytime. No, he can't. Use despite harm, loss of control. That's the definition of addiction, really concisely. Use despite harm, loss of control. If those two factors, those two qualities are present, you are addicted. I was just thinking about another meme. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's just great. I mean, the Babylon Bee has had a field day for the last 2 years. They don't even have to look for satire. I'm sure you've heard a lot of people recently. I mean, they've been saying this for now months. My friend got 2 shots and then a booster, and then he caught that virus and he wound up in the hospital. And of course, my reaction is, well, of course he did. I mean, he ruined his immune system. He destroyed any remaining antibodies he might have had earlier when he became naturally immune. And of course, he's in the hospital now. But no, that's not what they think. Their response is always the same. Can you imagine what would have happened if he hadn't had the 3rd shot? Right? He would have been dead. Well, someone put up a meme after all of that nonsense just started to become stale. And he said, you know what, my friend, he got 2 shots, he got a booster, and he wound up dead. But can you imagine what would have happened if he hadn't have had the 2 shots and a booster? He would have been dead. I had a surgery attending, an old crusty guy in his late 60s who was a trauma surgeon, always getting his hands in guts, arms and legs bleeding out, and he'd just stick his finger in an artery and yeah, let's go get a CAT scan, and don't pull your finger out. Really, really interesting guy. I think he was in the medic in the army when he was in his training, and he didn't really teach us anything, but he was very entertaining. And he gave us a lecture in our surgery rotation in medical school, and he said, you know what the difference is between dead and dead? It's like, dead is dead, right? No, it's not. All right, well, that's what I thought. No, it's not. When someone comes into the emergency room and they're turning blue and you don't get a pulse and you're doing chest compressions and you don't really see any movement and the person's cold, that person's dead. I said, yeah, I would agree with that. You go on an ambulance ride along, you get to the scene, body over here, head over there. That's dead. He had a point, actually. So I guess you can get 2 shots and a booster and be dead, but you can still go a little further. You can be dead. That only happens if you don't get a shot, apparently. I've been talking a lot for the last year about fear and how we're a country of fear. We've reached this stage of mass delusional psychosis. I mean, Robert Malone, he really made this expression nationally and internationally known when he went on the Joe Rogan podcast about a month ago. He's not a psychiatrist, he's not a psychologist, he's not an active clinical physician. He's a bench researcher and very knowledgeable about science. But he's not really a clinician. And he likes to mix and match expressions quite a bit. He was influenced to a large extent by the work of Matthias Desmet, a Belgian psychologist who's been writing about totalitarianism and what he calls mass formation. And just substitute psychosis for formation, and that's what he means, mass psychosis. He's been talking about that for decades. I didn't know about Matthias Desmet until October, November or so of this past year when I saw a recording of a podcast interview he had done that had about 780,000 views. It's very impressive. And he talked about mass formation or mass psychosis and how it comes about in a very similar way to the way I had been talking about it since summer or fall of 2020, only I called it mass delusional psychosis, which is the subtitle of my book, which is essentially a simultaneous loss of rationality across an entire population, which is what we saw in spring of 2020. Everybody kind of went crazy at the same time. Unfortunately, Dr. Robert Malone, he kind of mixed the two together and he came up with his own phrase, which he called mass formation psychosis, which is actually redundant. It's kind of like calling somebody dead, dead. Mass psychosis, psychosis. Any case, that's fine. He got the word out and he got people thinking and talking about this idea of delusional psychosis, people who are acting irrationally due to fear and how they're being driven to become more and more psychotic, more and more delusional through this constant influx of fear. I've been focusing a lot on that in the last year to try to explain how we got here. How did we all, not of course anybody here in this room, no, but in America, how many people in the United States started to lose their minds collectively? And this is important, as I said, because we need to diagnose the problem. We need to understand how we got here before we can actually move forward, before we can change things. I think 2022 is not going to be the year for mass delusional psychosis. That was last year. That was 2020. I think 2022 is going to be the year for recovery. Yes. And I'm not saying this just because I want to be an optimist. You know, Dennis Prager often says, I'm not an optimist or a pessimist. I'm a realist. I don't believe things will turn out well because I want them to. I only say that I expect that things will turn out well when I have evidence to support that belief. And I think we have ample evidence to support that belief now. I see it in my practice. I see it in the people around me in Los Angeles, which is sort of like San Francisco and honestly, even this area, pretty much ground zero for the mass delusional psychosis. I mean, people out here are crazy. But there's been a subtle shift. It comes in these small ways that are really symbolic. Like, for example, you go into a store that you've been going into without a mask for the last year and a half, always being yelled at. And this time you go in and they don't say anything. Small, but significant. Or you get an email from the mother of a patient who lives in Santa Monica, single mother with a couple of kids, and she absolutely hates that yellow guy with the orange hair. She's suffering from full-blown TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. She loves Joe Biden. She voted for Obama. She thinks that Republicans are racist and the Democrats are going to save the country. And all she reads is The Atlantic. And she sends you an email, and it's an article from Fox News about how children are being abused by being forced to wear masks in school. And she says, have you read this? And I say, well, I was the one that was interviewed for the article. I didn't know that. And then when she comes to your office, she rails against the fact that her children have been in Zoom school for a year and a half. Her daughter had to start seeing a therapist. Her son is depressed. And when they had to go back to school, wearing masks, indoors and outdoors, she knew that it was wrong. She knew that it was horrible. She knew that it was harming her children. And then when her son was told on January 4th that he can't go back to school for another 3 weeks because one of his classmates' friends, cousins, grandfathers, dogs, ex-wives, ferrets, infant had an asymptomatic positive test 13 days ago. And he has to quarantine and isolate at home until February 1st. She's done. She's done. And she says, I'm going to vote Republican in the fall. This is a true story. This just happened in the last few weeks. This is happening all over the country. Everywhere. The people that are in the middle, the people that have been weary, the people that have been fearful, not the brainwashed people, the people that just sort of went along with stuff because that's what they always did. They just kind of punch D every time they go to the ballot box and they put a hex over the R's. Those people are starting to get really angry. And I like to see anger. Anger means that you're mobilizing your energy for action. And they haven't been acting. They've been passive for a very long time. And now they're starting to act. I hear about it in the news. I see school mask strikes going on across the country, led by high school students. You've seen it, right? They can suspend me, they can suspend him, they can suspend her, they can't suspend all of us. And if they want to, they're going to lose all their funding. So the students are now leading the strikes. The mothers are supporting them. The mothers are saying, you know what, after I saw what Gavin Newsom did at Sophie Stadium, if Gavin doesn't have to wear a mask, neither does my 8-year-old. He's going to school without a mask today. The courts are winning on the right side of justice. They're supporting those small number of mayors and governors who are actually getting rid of these mask mandates, like in Virginia yesterday. The legislature actually supported, bipartisan. It's like 38-8, I think was the vote, something like that, Democrats and Republicans. The federal district courts are largely supporting the end to these mask mandates. Supreme Court is still a little bit mixed. Unfortunately, Brett Kavanaugh kind of wimped out and he sided with the leftists in allowing hospitals to mandate so-called vaccines for their workers, essentially saying, because you get money from us, we own you. So there is some still mixed results at different levels of the court, but largely speaking, these battles are being won. So the march that we had made initially for 1.5 years towards government dependency is starting to weaken because the individuals, the students, the parents, the legislatures, the courts are starting to get in line. Now, partly, I don't think it's because of a change of ethical principles. I think partly there's the reality that is growing that if they keep this up any longer, they're really going to lose everything. They're going to lose all their power. And we have an election coming up in the fall, and they know that. So part of it is, I think, just Machiavellian, but I don't really care what their motivation is as long as it stops. So I think that we have very good reason to think things will change. So I've started to speak about a new subject, which is going to be part of my next book that I'm in the process of writing, which is tentatively titled, not United States of Fear, but Freedom from Fear, a 12-step program to an individual and a national recovery. It's going to be modeled after the AA 12-step program, as well as Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, programs that I both admire and respect greatly. And the reason why I'm using the metaphor of addiction is that I believe it's apt. I believe that the people who are, not the control freaks, not the narcissists, the sociopaths, the Faucis, the Newsoms, not them, but the victims, the unwitting victims of the fear, I think that they're actually addicts. They are using fear to spite harm, and they've lost control. These are the Karens, getting back to the topic of women. Why are all the women hysterical? Why are they running around screaming at people to put their masks on? And why is it generally women that are doing it? And I believe that it's because men have become eunuchs, cowards. They've become emasculated. They've stepped away from their roles. Their masculine identity has been destroyed and relinquished to a large degree. And so a vacuum has been filled by women. And most of the women try to fill it, become men. They can't, obviously. And so they become hyper emotional and hysterical. I think that's actually what's happened. So I'm blaming men and women equally. I'm not attacking women at all. They're just trying to do their best, but they can't become men despite what they're being told now. I mean, men don't really menstruate. But if you say that, that's misinformation. I mean, in our own backyard here, I mean, Apple, some people probably work here for Apple in the room, are putting out pregnant man emojis for the next edition of the iPhone software. So apparently Apple believes that men can get pregnant. If you say otherwise, you're spreading misinformation. Again, I'm not making this up, this is real. So I think that looking at addiction, the addiction model is very helpful. And I think it's also helpful because it shows people that there's a chance for recovery. There's a chance for wellness, but it also requires something of the addict. It requires an acknowledgement that they're addicted. The first step in AA is to acknowledge that you are an addict, that you've lost power over your addiction. That's the first step. And if you take that step and you start working the other steps, you start taking accountability for the harm you've caused yourself and others, you start to seek redress, you work the steps, you get away from the dealer. In this case, the dealer, I think, is actually media. Media keeps fueling the drug of fear, just like the guy on the street corner that keeps handing out the dime bags of crack. You're not going to be able to get off of the crack if you keep passing him by on your way to work every day. If you do your business meetings at the local bar and you're an alcoholic, is that going to work? Of course not. You've got to drop the dealer. You've got to get away from the media. You've got to stop the push notifications on your phone. You got to stop blasting CNN 24/7, going to the gym and listening to that nonsense. If you can do the work, which requires working the steps, I believe that a curious and motivated person can overcome his or her fear addiction and move forward. And that's a large group of people. It's not 100% of the population, I know that. Some percentage of the population has already been won over. This is not relevant to them, but it is relevant to the people that they might know. It's not relevant to the sociopaths and the sadists and the people who are still brainwashed, who don't want to leave the commune either. They're lost for now. But this large group in the middle, which I think is enough to sway things, they actually can be motivated to change. I think we need to start speaking to them. We need to start reaching out to people who are addicted to fear and let them know that they're hurting themselves, they're hurting others, but there's a way forward. We need a national recovery program for America. Because if we don't engage in this recovery program, if we believe that we are either being taken care of properly today, or if we foolishly and naively, in my opinion, wait for a human messiah to show up, another Donald Trump figure who's going to save us all, somebody up at the top, a Superman, we will fail. Because what got us into this problem was relying on the people on top to take care of us, rather than each one of us pursuing freedom at a cost. There is a cost. There is a price to be paid for taking risks. But there is a far larger price to be paid for not. And that is losing everything. And that is why I began to speak out 2 years ago, because I realized that I was going to take a risk, I was going to pay a price, I was going to lose patients, colleagues, and friends, end quote. But I knew that if I did nothing, likely everything would be gone anyway. And then I wouldn't even have my own integrity to stand on at the end. So I decided to fight. I figured if I fought and the war was lost, at least I would be on the right side of it. The losing side, but the right side. I'd rather be right than be in the majority. That's what I decided, and that's why I started to speak up. I think that, thank you. I think that if we are going to win the war, the battle will be won. And the battle of the data battle, that was won a long time ago. I don't even want to talk about data anymore. It's pointless. But the battle of getting our rights and our freedoms back from all the mandates, that battle will be won very soon. I think by Easter, all the mandates are going to be over. Not because people have woken up, but because practically it can't continue anymore. The host has been bled dry. We have to replenish the host for more blood sucking later. And that's why the larger war is so important. And the larger war, in my view, and this is why I don't want to get bogged down in medicine. I can talk about the medicine just as well as Peter McCullough and Robert Malone and Pierre Corey and all these guys that I hang out with and I chat with and I go to conventions with and travel with. They're wonderful people and they know a lot. But there's a bigger issue here above all of this. And that's the point I want to drive home. We are not in a battle, we are in a war. And the war is for our independence at the risk of dependency. Because in the end, what the government, the politicians, the corporations, and the media wants is nothing short of dependency on them. And they're largely getting it right now. All you have to do is look at history. Look at what happened to China. Look at what happened to the Soviet Union. Look what happened in Cuba. Look what happened to Venezuela. Many of these countries were very prosperous before the despot took over, before a crisis was generated, emergency powers were created, liberties were suspended, and they were never given back. Massive, massive death and suffering. More human beings died in the 20th century of unnatural causes than at any time in human history. 60 to 100 million people in the Soviet Union and China, mostly just in China. Starved to death, murdered, cut into pieces, executed, horrid. And we are going down that path now. We will win the battle, I have no doubt about that, but we need to win the war. We need the war for our independence. Because if we don't, we're going to become dependent on people who do not have our good interests and our best interests at heart. So we have to start from the ground level. We have to start from the individual level. We have to accept and acknowledge that each of us has something to give. It might not be public speaking, it might not be money, it might not be activism, but all of us, each one of us has something to put into this fight. It is a fight. We can't stand by and let other people do the work for us or allow people at the top to make decisions for us. That's a huge mistake. We have to go back to our roots. The man that ran the Attila's gym out in Jersey, who stood up to the despots, he's running for elected office. Guy with the beard. Ian Smith is running for elected office. And he said in an interview on Dan Bongino earlier this morning, he said, I believe that we are supporting the wrong people. We're supporting professional politicians who don't come from the people. We need the people to step up and do the politicizing. I think he's right. This guy runs a gym and he wants to represent the people in his home state. Good for him. We need more people like that. Not everyone needs to run for office. Mike Lindell is often mentioned. But every person can do something. Every person has a role to play.
That's why we need term limits.
So there's a lot that we can do, and I'll be happy to speak in more detail about that during the Q&A section. But I want to leave you with some hope. This is the year for a national recovery. This is not the year to continue to be afraid. This is the year that we take our country back, piece by piece, individual by individual, and we get our liberties back, we get our freedoms back, and we start to treat the addiction to fear, and we enroll our nation in a recovery program. Thank you.
In our increasingly secular society, because there's nothing larger than ourselves, are we more vulnerable to this type of propaganda because we're looking for something larger and we turn to government?
Yes, and that's largely why the churches were assaulted and attacked from the very beginning. Every left-wing dictatorship has attacked religion, and there's a very simple reason for that. When one fears a higher power, a power higher than the government, that higher power becomes a threat. Because a despotic ruler, a dictatorship, does not want you to fear anybody or anything above him. That's why religion is such a threat to totalitarians. That's why the bars, the liquor stores, the pot shops, many of them were kept open throughout the state from the very beginning of the closures and the lockdowns, the churches were closed. And yes, casinos also were kept open. Vice is always promoted in a totalitarian state because it pacifies the people. It controls them. It feeds addiction. Churches do the opposite. Churches free people, and it creates allegiance to a power above the ruler. And that's the reason, in my view, why religion was under attack from the outset of this pandemic. But as I said it during my talk, religion has been under attack from a long time ago. This is not something that started in March of 2020. There has been an attack, a war against religion for a very long time. There has been a war against Christmas for decades. When was the last time you heard Merry Christmas? It's Happy Holidays, Happy Holidays, Happy Holidays. It's in our best interest to celebrate Christmas, even if we're not religious, because Christmas is an American holiday. That's why it's a federal holiday. It's actually a federal holiday on the calendar, and yet nobody says Merry Christmas. Is there any other federal holiday where you don't say the name of the holiday? Happy day after the 3rd of July? No, you say 4th of July. Independence Day, right? Thanksgiving. Happy first day of the new year. No, you say Happy New Year. So why don't we say Merry Christmas? Because Merry Christmas is a religious holiday as well, and it's a threat. That's the reason.
So a couple questions from the audience about education and background. I'm going to ask both of these questions, and then Mark, you can answer them together if you will. And by the way, the camera is in the middle. I'm over here, so don't feel like you have to look at me, but I know it's hard not to not to do that. But we only have one camera tonight. So question from the audience. Why are people with advanced degrees so bought into this much more than blue collar workers? And there's another question from a nurse in the room, who's a surgical nurse. And she says the doctors are still brainwashed while the housekeepers and techs are starting to say enough. They are the ones questioning and saying no more. What's going on here?
Well, I think there's several answers to that question. I'll try to combine them into one cohesive answer. Partly, it's due to the indoctrination in our school system. So the further you go, high school, 2-year, 4-year, graduate, postgraduate, the more indoctrinated you become. Because in order to be successful, you have to give back the answers that will allow you to continue to the next rung on the ladder. And if you don't, you're arrested, meaning you're blocked from further advancement. So there's a filtering effect. The people that get that far are the people that either know how to play the game or the people that have agreed to be indoctrinated. That's one reason. That's been true for 10, 20, maybe 30 years, depending on what you look at. Another reason, which I think is more interesting, and I started writing about this in my Substack account, which is like a column. It's like Twitter, but it's a column. And I do it once a week. You know, some people tweet 27 times a day. My dog farted, tweet. Who cares? Look at my tiramisu. They take a photograph of it. Food porn on Twitter. So I write, hopefully, important thoughts on Substack every week. I started about a month ago, right before New Year. It comes out every Thursday morning, about 600 words, typical column length. And the last one I put out was entitled, two ago, was Fantasy versus Reality. And I think this also explains why so many professionals and doctors are so taken by this lie. And I think that when you look at people who work with their hands, people who work outdoors, people who build things, they largely live in reality, right? If you decide to skip every other brick because it looks aesthetically pleasing, the wall will collapse. That's the reality. But if you decide to rename vocabulary, words, and language, if you decide as a professor of medicine at UCLA that there's no such thing as mothers anymore, you just have birthing people, which is what one female professor of medicine was forced to say at UCLA in the medical school last year after she used the word pregnant women and was excoriated for making those who are non-binary feel uncomfortable. Nothing happens. You just keep moving along. You can continue to live in that fantasy when you're in an academic environment or an environment where you work with computers and everything goes through Zoom, because there's not really any consequence to living in fantasy land. So I think that there's been this chasm that's been growing for a number of years. It's really been accelerated in the last couple of years with what, I forgot who coined this term. I try to acknowledge people whose ideas I borrow, and I can't remember his name now who did it, but the Zoom class and then everyone else. The Zoom class continues to live in fantasy land, and they don't really want this to end because they Zoom it in from their cabin in Tahoe. But the everyone else class, the people that serve the food to Nancy Pelosi with the mask on their face while she sits there like Marie Antoinette eating her salad, those people, they actually live in reality. And I think that at some point, the chasm gets so big that it just ends up collapsing, which is kind of what's happening now. This is why, another reason why I think things are going to end very soon, because when you're lied to for 2 years, even if you're a Zoom class person and you dutifully wear your face shield, your double mask, your anti-social distancing, your hand sanitizer, your quarantining, respecting closures, all of that nonsense, and then you get your third and your fourth shot, and then the week later for Christmas, you get sick. And then you don't die. You actually get better in 72 hours. It starts to wear on you that maybe this whole thing was a big charade, largely speaking. I'm not saying that there was no virus. I'm just saying that everything we're told about it has been a lie from the very beginning. Everything has been a lie. When that divide gets really big, the whole system collapses. So I think that people who are in professions that are not highly educated with lots of degrees, they can continue to live the lie, the fantasy for a very long time. There's a lot of fuel in that tank. The people who are uneducated, I don't mean that derisively. Actually, it's a word of praise now for me, uneducated, meaning not indoctrinated. Those people, largely speaking, they actually know the truth because they have to live it. They can't suffer the consequences of fantasy. They can't pay that real price of faking things, of self-deception. The people who have lots of degrees and letters after their name, they can live in a state of self-deception very, very long. Now, ultimately, the truth will always win, but they can really push this much further than the person who is doing real work. That's what I believe.
Okay. I want to ask a question from our online audience. How do we as parents help our teen and young adult children recognize this COVID madness and overcome their fear and return to a, quote, normal life?
This is a really sad question. And I'm going to be very blunt. Parents who have been quarantining, locking down, masking their children have been committing child abuse. Now, that doesn't mean that you should lose your children or that they should be taken away from you and they shouldn't love you anymore. What it means is you need to face the reality that you've been harming your children, and you need to take accountability for it. You need to apologize. You need to make amends. You need to do what's right. Because if you don't, not only will you hurt your children, but when those children grow up, they're going to ask you this very simple question. Why did you force me to wear a diaper on my face for 18 months? What were you thinking? And don't tell me that you were trying to keep me safe. I'm not that stupid. And you're going to ruin the relationship you have with your children forever if you don't own up to it. So that's really important. The people, the mothers and the fathers who think that, well, they can just pretend like nothing happened. One day they wake up and they realize, oh, well, we don't have to do this anymore. As if you can just erase the past. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't. Trust me, I see children all the time. I know it's not going to work like that. So what do? How do we help children? For one thing, we have to start saying no. We're not going to send our children to government schools anymore. We're not going to put masks on their faces. We're not going to deprive them from extracurriculars and social events. That has to stop now. That's the first thing. When the pipe's broken, you don't start mopping up the floor, you turn off the water, right? And then you mop up later. We have to do that. That's the first step. How do you help them after the fact? That's really hard because every child is different. Every child has different vulnerabilities. Some children will bounce back on their own. Others will be hobbled but improved with treatment. And then there's some kids that I think are just never going to actually regain what they had before. I mean, the Johns Hopkins study that came out a few months ago showed that infants born after January 1 of 2020 had a 22-point drop in their IQs compared to infants born before January 1, 2020. So the pandemic babies actually have brain damage. Is it just masks? No. Is it just being kept at home? No. It's a combination of all of those abusive practices over an 18-month period of time. All of it. Kids are very resilient, but I mean, you can kill a child if you suffocate it long enough. They also found in a follow-up study that was published a month later that kids up to age 5, 0 to 5, suffered a 24% drop in cognitive functioning year over year compared to 2019, 2020, 2021. They actually got stupid. That's a lot. That's not a piddly amount. 24% cognitive decline. Will they bounce back? I hope so. I mean, there's neuroplasticity, brains do regenerate. I am hopeful, but I don't think some children are going to get everything back. That they really will be the victims of the projection of adult fear and anxiety onto them. Because this was all adult caused. This is the fault of us, the adults. We blew it. We allowed our anxiety, our fear, to be projected onto our children so that they could treat us. For the first time in history, we hurt children to protect old people. Are you kidding me? Since when? What country does that? What country sacrifices their youth to protect the older generation? That's insane. That's immoral. It's evil. But we did it. So there's a lot of reckoning to be done. And I don't know in the end how many people will actually fully recover, how many children will get better. But we have to stop the damage now. That's the first step.
Before we move on from the children, Dr. McDonald, do you want to say something about the older children, the college-age students? Because there's a lot of concern in this room, online, and around the country about them.
Well, right now, children, I call them children, teenagers are going back to college, finally, face-to-face, in-person instruction, but many of them are being ordered to get booster shots. I know 2 patients of mine in my practice, one returning to Scripps, one returning to SC, one undergrad, one grad, has been told, you have to get a booster before you can return to in-person instruction. Well, the female student, she got 2 shots. She believed in this from the beginning. I got to get my shots. I got to protect everybody. She was lied to. The adults lied to her. And she's a Biden supporter, a Democrat. And after the first shot, she started bleeding. She had menstrual bleeding that was uncontrollable for 7 weeks. She had to have a hormonal IUD implanted to stop it. She got better. And then after the second shot, a month later, she caught the Chinese virus anyway. Big surprise, right? And of course, she got better, as they all do. But she said, I'm not getting another shot. She woke up. She realized she had been had. And then she got a letter from Scripps that said, you have to get your booster in order to go back in person. She said, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to put myself at physical harm for a disease that doesn't affect me, to which I already have immunity. That's insane. She's completely right. The boy, he got his first shot to go to SC because he just didn't want to be suspended for a whole semester, and he had horrible chest pain. He probably had myocarditis. And of course, he got sick too, and he recovered. And now he's being told he has to get a booster to return to SC. So I think it might be a tough sell, but I think that you either need to buy yourself some time if you're a college student by postponing or getting exemptions, whatever you need to do for now until this all blows over, or you need to leave school and you need to find something that's safe. I mean, really safe, not safe in the way that we use the word safe. Because I don't think that it's acceptable to put yourself at this kind of risk and compromise anymore. If the problem is psychological, if the young person is, and very well could be, damaged because of all the isolation, I have a lot of kids in my practice now, older kids, who are really messed up psychologically, they need therapy. They really need to go see a therapist. Unfortunately, 80% of the therapists are incompetent. And most of them are not seeing patients in person. So good luck trying to find a competent therapist that will see them in person. That's also a battle that's a tough one.
Yikes, and I echo that. Okay, so here's a different perspective. I'm going to read, again, 2 questions so that you can address them both together. both from the floor. I am not, nor have I ever been afraid through the pandemic. How did I escape the addiction of fear? And another person says, I knew from day one this pandemic was a hoax, no doubt, but I have lost moral, intellectual, and empathetic respect for the sheeple who fell for the fraud. How do I forgive these people and not blame and shame them?
I spoke with a young man, young man meaning his late 20s recently, who said he's in LA, and he knew from the beginning this was all nonsense. And he said, every time I see somebody outdoors wearing a mask, I feel a fleeting sense of contempt. I love that expression, fleeting sense of contempt. This kind of, oh, God. And then he recovers, he's fine. I completely sympathize with them. I completely get it. There are people who are somewhat inoculated or immune to this hypnosis, this mass delusional psychosis, this fear addiction. I'm still researching myself informally what inoculated them. Sometimes it's upbringing, Eastern European, Central European countries. They can just sniff dictatorship, lies, propaganda. They just smell it. There's the famous expression in Russian, I don't know Russian, but it goes something like this: there is no investia in Pravda, no Pravda in investia. Meaning there's no news in Pravda, there's no truth, which is word for Pravda in English. There's no truth in news. And the Central and Eastern Europeans that have immigrated to this country, they can sniff out lies and propaganda from media and government very, very easily. So that's one factor, is upbringing. Another is hypnotizability. If you go to a comedy club where there's a hypnotist, they always pick 10 or 12 people out of the audience, bring them up on the stage, ask them questions, and then start sending individuals back to the audience, rejecting them until they only have 2 or 3 left. They use these test queries to see how hypnotizable, how suggestible those volunteers are from the audience, because they want people who will go along with the show, who will be suggestible. And I think that there is a component of suggestibility in individuals in this population. I can't predict. I don't know why or how it happens. It has nothing to do with IQ. It has nothing to do with sexual orientation or race. It's completely irrelevant. But there seems to be some aspect of suggestibility in each individual person that's high or low or medium. That's a mystery to me, but I believe that it's profoundly important in understanding how people can be so easily taken. And another is just upbringing, trauma, abuse, just propensity for fear, anxiety disorders. People in my practice who have anxiety disorders tend to be much more fearful of getting sick and dying from this virus. Not all of them, but many of them do. But it has nothing to do with how smart you are. I'm gonna make that very clear. It's not IQ based. And I've seen this repeatedly. It's completely unrelated to intelligence. In fact, some people that are highly intelligent tend to be the most primed to believe in this nonsense because they rationalize things a lot. They don't trust what they see. They just trust what they're told. People who are not that bright, they believe what they see around them. They don't care what people tell them. They're not interested in that. Right?
But there's some questions that are kind of surrounding the medical profession. So there's a doctor and 2 doctors that are married in the room, and they say they're leaving the state to practice somewhere else, and they are not happy. I'm not going to use the language that they use, but they are not happy to be here. And other people are asking, how do we relate to our physicians after this? It's for many people, it's very awkward to go into the doctor's office. Yeah. It's unsettling, isn't it? It's so hard to go into your doctor's office and be pressured to get a vaccine and not be able to have a conversation about it. I mean, there's a medical conversation to be had, but it's not really available to you. So if you could talk a little bit about kind of inside baseball from your perspective about the professional side of this, that would be great.
So the medical profession has thoroughly disgraced itself. Yeah. About 80%, I always use that rough rule of thumb, about 80% of the physicians I no longer respect. Yeah, the ones that I know. Largely speaking, those who are employed, and most of them are employed, unfortunately, by hospital systems, they're the first to go. They're the first to cave. because they have an incentive to. They're scared, and they're scared of losing their jobs. They're scared of ostracizing themselves or losing their licenses or being suspended. Very few physicians, like say Simone Gold is an exception, were curious and asked questions at the beginning and said, wait a minute, why can I not treat this patient with hydroxychloroquine? It was a safe drug until last week. And then she got fired. Most people aren't willing to do that. I mean, medical school is a big investment. Time, sweat, blood, money. I mean, you're a decade older when you finish and you're $1 million in debt. It takes a long time just to catch up of all of that. So I understand why people don't want to give that up and risk it. I get it. My advice would be for you to follow your conscience, your ethics, your values with your doctor and choosing your doctor, just as you would shopping at a store. So call your doctor and say, you know, if I were to get sick with this virus, would you treat me with hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, vitamin D, zinc, budesonide, steroids, repurposed medications, aspirin even, N-acetylcysteine? Would you do that? And if the answer is, are you kidding? Are you some right-wing extremist? No. I would tell you to stay home and pray, and if you couldn't breathe, go to the hospital and be intubated, and then hope that you are one of the 2 or 3% that don't die. That's what I would do. If he says that, you say, thank you very much, you terminate care, and you find another doctor. Do that now, while you're healthy, not when you're in an emergency state, because you don't have the luxury of finding a new doctor when you need medical care now. That's very, very important. You do it now, you prepare. Same thing with therapists. If you are in therapy or you're looking for therapy for someone else, you want a referral to a therapist, you call up the therapist's office and you say, are you seeing patients in person? The answer is, oh God, no. Out of an abundance of caution, I'm using Zoom, and I will until it's safe, whatever that means. Say, thank you very much. You hang up and you call another one. You may have to do this 9 or 10 times, the 80% rule, right? But you will find them eventually. And I think it's worthwhile making that investment. Because if you are with a doctor or if you're with a therapist right now who is fearful, irrational, God forbid, sociopathic, why are you with them? Why are you spending money at a store that doesn't support your values? Why are you putting your children in a government school that teaches girls that they can be boys and can chop their breasts off and chemically castrate themselves and get abortions without your consent? Why are you doing that? It's an important question. If you're doing that, why? And don't give me some piddly excuse like, well, I'm busy, I don't have the money. I mean, these are your core values. If you're not willing to stand up for them, then what are you willing to stand up for? So it's the same thing with doctors and therapists.
Well, speaking of doctors, everybody in this room loves Dr. Fauci. So, question from the audience is, which category does he belong in of your 3 categories?
I wish we had one of those little Cheesecake Factory buttons where you could choose option A, B, or C, and then the scores come up on the top of the board. I suspect we'd have basically 100% category A, which is sociopath. I wouldn't have said this a year ago. I did not know about his past to the degree that I do today. I've met and spoken with Judy Mikovits multiple times. We've spoken together at different Calvary churches. I met with her in Austin after her husband was murdered by an ICU nurse in Ventura County about 2 months ago. And I did not realize or recognize from her work and also from RFK Jr.'s recent The Real Anthony Fauci publication. And I've met with him and I've spoken at his fundraisers, and we've had dinner together in Los Angeles. I did not know the extent to which this man was truly evil. I thought Judy was a quack, and I thought RFK Jr. was an anti-vaxxing lunatic. I did, and I have learned so much in the last 2 years, and I'm willing to admit that I didn't know, that I was misinformed, because I want above all to be able to approximate what is true. My pursuit and my allegiance is to truth. That's it. And if somebody finds out that something I've said is incorrect, I thank them for telling me so that I can not make that mistake again. That's what I'm loyal to. So I believe now, having read and studied and learned about Anthony Fauci's career, not just 1 year, career of knowingly allowing and encouraging the death of human beings, and you all know about the Beagle experiments where he tortured dogs to death overseas, that this man does not have a conscience. He's absolutely a narcissist. I mean, did you see the 3 covers he made with his little skinny pants and his sockless deck shoes with his legs crossed on these vanity journals that he published last year? He didn't publish them; they were their publications that he was in on his covers. The fact that he did this and is still doing it today tells me that this man is actually sick. He doesn't have a conscience. He's a bad human being. And as Laura Logan said, which got her, she was fired from Fox back in November. I met with her that night, actually. She came to Mickey Willis's house after he filmed me for Plandemic 3. She was on the phone with what's the name of the, that'll come to me again, investigative reporter, talking about how she had been just let go because she called Anthony Fauci a Joseph Mengele on air. James O'Keefe, she was talking to him as she hit the door. Given what he's done, and over a number of years, I believe that this man is actually an evil person. He's not just narcissistic. He's not just mistaken. He's actually evil. He's sinister. And I'm going to say one more thing. There are some things that I can't rationally explain that have happened in the last 2 years. I try to be very rational. I try to explain them, but there's a gap between what I can explain and what's happened. And the only explanation I can find that can fill that gap is evil. Something sinister and evil, not just people corruptly trying to take stuff from us and take away our liberties. All that's true, but there's something else that is truly sinister, truly evil that has come upon us. Something wicked this way came in March of 2020. I really do believe that because I can't explain it any other way.
How many people in this room have that same sense? Raise, would you put, there you go, Mark.
So I'm not alone.
You are not alone, but you are distinct in your humility and that you're willing to say that you're wrong and that you're anxious to do so when you're detached from truth. I want the audience to know that the reason I certainly wanted to invite Dr. McDonald here tonight was when I read this in his book. When I work with patients, I remind them that everything starts with a shared commitment to reality. The goal of therapy is not to feel good. It is to live in reality, no matter how it may feel. That's a big deal.
Reality is messy. It is. Reality is not comfortable. It challenges you, it embarrasses you, it disappoints you. But if you don't start from reality, if you don't start from truth, you will never, ever be able to grow and develop and attain your potential. It is not possible. And that's why I tell my patients we have to start with what is real and what is true. We cannot work within a fantasy world. We cannot pretend as if Disneyland is real. Now you can have fun, you can be creative. Fantasies allow creativity and they allow for play. That's very, very important. But play is not real. We have to be able to distinguish the two. And we've been living in a fantasy world, pretending that it's real for the last 2 years, and it is not.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mark a couple more questions, and then I want to give him time to say hello to you and for you to be able to buy his books and maybe buy a book for a friend as well, because what we're hearing tonight is profound and quite important. A couple of people, or 2 or 3, are asking questions about friends. So let me say exactly what these members are asking. You mentioned that you had lost friends and they've lost friends too. So they want to hear about your experience of that. But here's how bad it is. People are asking how to deal with friends on this fear trip. And one says that she has friends that believe that not getting a COVID shot is as bad as those who initially contracted HIV/AIDS and still had unprotected sex with others. How do you respond to that?
I tried the educational pathway for a long time. But what I realized is that data and information does not sway people. If they haven't been swayed by now, they never will be by data. This is emotional. And to some degree, it's psychological and mental. So there's no point in trying down that path. What I would suggest is this: when you come across somebody who you feel it's worthwhile to try to realign with, say a family member, a friend, not just a stranger on the street, but someone who really matters to you that you can't just brush off, assess their level and degree of curiosity. Make a vague comment or leave it as sort of a question, something kind of open-ended, like, wow, if all these protective measures really worked, why are we in this situation right now? It's very vague, but it's provocative, right? And if that person just says, what are you, some kind of a Trump voter? I got that from a patient just 2 days ago, a woman with the mask and shield. She comes in and, did you get vaccinated? I said, you don't know me very well, do you? She stepped away all the way to the wall and put her masks back on. I could tell she wasn't curious. But if you get an answer like, what do you mean? What do you mean by this situation? Or you get a, yeah, it is true. I got 2 shots, and I got a booster, and then I got sick for Christmas. And then I was fine, and now I'm supposed to get another booster. That's kind of strange. That's amusing, not AMU, A space MUSING. That's a sort of an expression of wonderment, of curiosity. I think that tells you that there's an opening and that there's a point in continuing the conversation. If you don't, if you get something else that just is kind of a defensive ad hominem attack or a weird, non sequitur about Trump, there's really no point in continuing. Don't waste your time. You're just going to make yourself weary. And the other person's just going to dig in. Just make the mental note that this person right now, no matter how much you care or love this person is lost for now. Maybe he or she will change and recover, get hit in the face with a frying pan, metaphorically speaking, and kind of wake up. Maybe not. But there's nothing you can do. You didn't break them. You can't fix them, right? I really believe that that's very important. There is no point in hanging on to somebody trying to change that person when that person is not motivated to change himself. It's just pointless. So just accept that. Accept the things you cannot change, as they say in AA. And then just, pray or hope that might shift in the future. There's nothing more that you can do, and there's nothing more that you should do. I wish I had a solution or an answer for you, but I think this is really the best path.
So we always want to know what we can do, and you're telling us what we can do. There's a question about what we can do collectively. As conservative people, as people who are interested in liberty, we're not innately drawn to grouping. We don't wake up in the morning and say, how can I control other people's lives? How can I get my friends to come over and control a lot of other people's lives? Because we simply don't think like that. So I think we're at an innate disadvantage sometimes. We seem to be playing defense a lot. So the question is, how can we organize to stop such well-organized, sinister groups?
First thing you do, and I give credit to Dennis Prager for this, is you build and reinforce and associate with like-minded people. You've got to do that first. If you are isolated, if you are alone, if you just feel like, oh my God, everybody is against me, and they might be. There's a lot of crazy people out there.
I just love it when psychiatrists use the word crazy.
There was a cartoon, one of my favorite Gary Larson cartoons, that showed the analyst making notes behind the couch and the patient is lying there. It was probably a lizard or something, because he always uses animals. And the psychiatrist is writing notes, and you can see from the camera's point of view what he's writing, but the patient can't see it. And the doctor is just writing he's underlining the words, just plain nuts. So yes, like-minded people, very, very important. That's the first thing. Is if you don't have like-minded people around you, you will be defeated. You will burn out. You will feel completely crushed the first or second or maybe the third time that you get shot down by not wearing a mask in a store. You need that support. You need that reinforcement. You need the mirror of sanity and rationality. Because if all you see is the funhouse mirror, if every time you look in the mirror, you're 350 pounds, You're going to start to feel that you're 350 pounds. So that's the first step. The second, I think, is to take to heart what I said earlier about how this has to come from the bottom up, not the top down. And that's the next step in spending time with like-minded people, is organizing. And that can be physically in a room with a group like this. It can also be forming a Telegram group. A firefighter at the Godspeak Cavalry Chapel where Charlie Kirk goes in LA. I went to speak there with Simone Gold and Jeff Barkey, my podcast co-host, about 6 months ago. Fireman stood up and he raised his hand and he said, what do we do? They're forcing us to get these shots. I'm just one guy. What do I do? And Simone Gold grabbed the microphone and she's jumping up and down like this next to me. I'm like, oh, here she goes. And she essentially said, you need to form a Telegram group and you need to attract other firemen and first responders who don't want to get the shots. Well, he did that. 72 hours later, Rob McCoy texted me, the pastor at the church. He said, this fireman, he's got 700 people signed up already. And 2 months later, he and Simone Gold and about 4,000 to 8,000, you never know by looking at media. They always say 250 people assembled at this. Well, it's like 4,000 to 8,000 people showed up downtown LA with police helicopters flying around in a sign of support, show of support for firemen, first responders, and their family protesting vaccine mandates. Right?
That is such a great story.
One guy did that with the help of 699 other people. So yes, you can make a difference as an individual. There are things you can do. Everyone has a role to play, but you have to start with getting support for yourself. And then the ideas will come and you'll start planning and organizing. I'm good at this. She's good at that. Some people are good at marketing. Some people are good at speaking. Some people have money. Some people just like to go out and raise hell with a poster. Everybody has a strength. You'll start to generate ideas with other people, but you can't do it on your own. You can't do it locked inside your head. You can't do it just sitting behind a computer. That's the most important thing. Channel your anger, your frustration into action with other people, and then things will come of it. I guarantee you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Mark McDonald. Dr. Mark McDonald brought his strengths to the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley tonight. We are so grateful. Thank you. That is the truth.